Have you ever met someone who seemed perfectly friendly? They smiled. They said all the right things. Everyone around them appeared to like them, yet something inside you felt uneasy. You couldn't explain it logically. You couldn't point to anything specific, but deep down, something felt off. Many empaths experience this exact feeling, and for years they often question themselves. Am I being too judgmental? Am I overthinking? Maybe I'm imagining things. The strange part is that these feelings often appear long before any obvious evidence emerges. Nothing looks wrong on the surface. The person may seem kind, confident, charming, and socially successful. Yet the empath continues feeling a subtle sense of discomfort they cannot ignore. But psychology suggests something interesting. Human beings constantly communicate on multiple levels. Words are only one small part of communication. Emotions, body language, tone of voice, facial expressions, micro-expressions, behavioral patterns, even brief emotional shifts. All of these signals are being processed by the brain every second, often outside conscious awareness. And empaths often operate at an unusually high level of emotional awareness. They notice inconsistencies. They sense emotional contradictions. They pick up subtle signals most people miss. When someone's smile doesn't match their emotions, when their words conflict with their behavior, when kindness feels rehearsed rather than genuine, the empath often detects it immediately. This is why fake people often make empaths uncomfortable. Not because empaths believe they are better, not because they want to judge others, but because their minds are constantly detecting emotional information beneath the surface. They aren't reacting to what is being said. They're reacting to what is being felt. In this video, we'll explore the psychological reasons why empaths feel uneasy around fake people, why authenticity feels safe while fakeness creates tension, and why that discomfort may actually be protecting them from emotional manipulation, hidden motives, and relationships that are not what they appear to be. Most people focus on what someone says. Empaths often focus on how it is being said. This creates a completely different experience. Imagine someone telling you, "I'm really happy for you." The words sound positive, but their tone feels forced. Their smile disappears quickly. Their body language feels tense. Their eyes don't seem to match their expression. Something about the interaction feels slightly unnatural. Most people may ignore those details. Empaths often don't. Because emotional awareness naturally directs attention toward nonverbal communication. Psychologists estimate that a large portion of emotional communication happens beyond words. The brain constantly compares spoken language with emotional signals. It is always asking a silent question: do these messages match? When both match, trust increases. Connection feels natural. The interaction feels safe and genuine. But when they conflict, the brain becomes alert. This is known as emotional incongruence, and empaths are particularly sensitive to it. They often notice the difference between genuine kindness and performed kindness, between real confidence and forced confidence, between authentic warmth and social performance. They may not consciously analyze every detail. In many cases, the process happens automatically. Their minds simply register that something doesn't feel right. Research in emotional intelligence suggests that emotionally aware individuals become highly skilled at recognizing subtle emotional cues. They notice tiny changes in tone, brief facial expressions, shifts in energy, moments of hesitation, and emotional reactions that others completely overlook. As a result, fake people often create a strange feeling of discomfort long before any evidence appears. The empath senses the inconsistency before they fully understand it. Their intuition notices the gap between what is being presented and what is actually being felt. And although they may struggle to explain it logically, that feeling can be difficult to ignore. Because more often than not, the emotional signals eventually reveal what the words were trying to hide. One of the biggest reasons empaths feel uncomfortable around fake people is simple. Their words and emotions are sending different messages. Psychology calls this incongruence. when a person's internal emotional state doesn't align with their external behavior. For example, someone praises you publicly, but secretly resents you. Someone acts supportive, but feels threatened by your success. Someone appears caring, but their actions repeatedly reveal selfish motives. Empaths often notice these contradictions, not because they possess magical abilities, but because they pay attention to emotional patterns. They observe what people say, but they also observe what people consistently do. And when those two things fail to match, the inconsistency becomes difficult to ignore. The brain naturally seeks consistency. Consistency creates trust. Consistency allows us to predict behavior, and predictability helps us feel emotionally safe. But inconsistency creates uncertainty, and uncertainty activates psychological discomfort. When someone's words repeatedly conflict with their actions, the brain begins questioning the reliability of the information being received. Fake people frequently create this conflict. Their behavior becomes a performance rather than an authentic expression of who they are. They may carefully manage their image, say what others want to hear, or present a version of themselves designed to gain approval. But maintaining a false image requires effort, and eventually small cracks begin to appear. The empath senses the gap, and that gap feels emotionally exhausting. It's similar to listening to music where every note is slightly out of tune. Most people may not notice immediately, but emotionally sensitive individuals feel the tension almost instantly, even if they cannot explain it. Something feels misaligned. Something feels unnatural. Over time, repeated exposure to these contradictions creates emotional fatigue, because the empath is constantly receiving two different messages at once. One message from the person's words, and another message from their behavior. And that's often why empaths become uneasy around people who constantly wear masks. Not because they expect perfection, but because authenticity feels safe, while inconsistency quietly signals that something beneath the surface may not be what it appears to be. Empaths process emotional information deeply, sometimes far more deeply than they realize. What feels like a simple conversation to someone else can become a complex emotional experience for an empath. When interacting with authentic people, the emotional message is clear. The words match the feelings. The behavior matches the intentions. The brain can relax. The nervous system feels safe. There is no need to constantly analyze what is happening beneath the surface. But fake people send mixed signals, and mixed signals require extra emotional processing. The empath unconsciously begins asking, what are they really feeling? Why does this seem forced? What aren't they saying? Why do their actions feel different from their words? Most of this questioning happens automatically. The empath may not even realize their mind is working overtime. Yet their brain continues trying to make sense of conflicting emotional information. This constant emotional analysis consumes mental energy. The result is emotional fatigue. Many empaths leave certain conversations feeling drained, not because the interaction was openly negative, not because anyone was openly hostile, but because their brain spent the entire time decoding contradictions. Psychologists often describe this as cognitive load. The mind works harder when information doesn't make sense. When messages are clear, the brain processes them efficiently. When messages are confusing, the brain must spend additional energy trying to understand them. Fake people create confusion. Authentic people create clarity. And because empaths naturally seek emotional truth, they become exhausted when surrounded by emotional inconsistency. The more masks someone wears, the harder the empath must work. The more emotional signals they must interpret. The more contradictions they must process. And eventually, their mind simply wants distance. Not because they dislike people, but because their emotional system is seeking relief from the constant effort of trying to understand someone who isn't being genuine. For the empath, authenticity feels peaceful, but fakeness feels mentally and emotionally overwhelming. Empaths crave something many people rarely discuss: authenticity. not perfection, not constant positivity, authenticity. An empath would often rather speak with someone honestly struggling than someone pretending everything is perfect. Because authenticity creates trust, it creates emotional safety, and it allows real connection to occur. When people are honest about who they are, what they feel, and what they are experiencing, the empath feels they are connecting with a real human being. Not a carefully constructed image, not a social mask, but a genuine person. Fake people often prioritize image over honesty, appearance over truth, approval over authenticity. They focus on being admired rather than being understood. And while this may impress some people on the surface, it often creates emotional distance. This creates a barrier. The empath senses they are interacting with a role rather than a real person, and meaningful connection becomes difficult. Because true connection requires openness, it requires honesty, it requires the willingness to be seen as imperfect. Research on human relationships consistently shows that vulnerability and authenticity strengthen emotional bonds. People connect through truth, not performance. People trust what feels real, not what feels rehearsed. This is why superficial conversations can leave empaths feeling empty. The interaction may look successful from the outside. Everyone may be smiling. The conversation may appear pleasant. But emotionally, nothing meaningful happened. No genuine thoughts were shared. No emotional honesty was present. No real connection was created. And because empaths deeply value emotional depth, fake interactions often feel incredibly unsatisfying. They leave the empath feeling disconnected rather than fulfilled. What many empaths seek isn't constant agreement or perfection. It's sincerity. It's emotional honesty. It's the feeling that someone is showing up as their true self. Because for an empath, a difficult but honest conversation will almost always feel more meaningful than a flawless conversation built entirely on appearances. Another reason fake people create discomfort is that empaths often notice hidden intentions. Psychologists call this impression management, the effort people make to control how others perceive them. Everyone does this to some degree. Most people naturally want to be liked, respected, and accepted. There is nothing unusual about that. But some individuals become obsessed with it. Their focus shifts from being genuine to carefully managing the image they present to the world. They constantly calculate reactions, seek validation, manipulate perceptions, and hide their true intentions. Rather than asking, "Am I being authentic?" they ask, "How can I make people see me a certain way?" Empaths frequently notice these patterns, not because they are searching for flaws, but because they naturally pay attention to behavior over time. They observe subtle inconsistencies. They notice when kindness appears transactional, when compliments feel strategic, when generosity comes with expectations, when friendliness feels conditional. They recognize when someone's behavior changes depending on who is watching, or when a person's actions seem motivated more by personal gain than genuine care. Again, this isn't supernatural. It's pattern recognition. The empath unconsciously gathers information over time. Small details, repeated behaviors, emotional shifts, contradictory actions, and subtle moments that most people quickly forget. While others focus on individual events, empaths often focus on patterns, and patterns reveal intentions. Eventually, a pattern emerges. The discomfort often appears long before the conscious mind understands why. The empath simply feels uneasy. Something feels off. Something doesn't fully align. Yet they may struggle to explain it. But as more evidence appears, the picture becomes clearer. The person's actions begin matching the feeling the empath sensed from the beginning. And once the pattern becomes clear, the empath realizes their intuition was warning them all along, not because they could read minds, but because their emotional awareness noticed what repeated behavior was quietly revealing beneath the surface. Many people assume intuition exists only in the mind, but psychology shows that the body also plays a role. In fact, some of our strongest emotional reactions begin long before we consciously understand what is happening. The nervous system constantly scans the environment for safety. This process occurs largely outside conscious awareness. Every interaction, every facial expression, every change in tone, every emotional signal. The brain and body are quietly gathering information and asking a simple question: am I safe here? When emotional signals feel predictable, the nervous system relaxes, the body feels calm, the mind becomes open, trust naturally develops. But when signals become inconsistent, the body becomes alert, because inconsistency often creates uncertainty. And uncertainty has always been something the human nervous system pays close attention to. This explains why some people make you feel calm, and others make you feel anxious, even when nothing obvious is happening. You may be sitting in a perfectly normal conversation, no argument, no conflict, no visible problem. Yet something inside you feels uncomfortable. For many empaths, this experience is surprisingly common. Fake behavior often creates uncertainty, and uncertainty can activate subtle stress responses. The empath may notice mental tension, restlessness, discomfort, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, or the sudden desire to leave the situation. These reactions aren't random. The nervous system is responding to emotional inconsistency. It is detecting a gap between what is being presented and what is actually being felt. The body often recognizes what the conscious mind hasn't yet explained. Before logic catches up, the nervous system has already noticed the mismatch. This is why many empaths later realize that their first impression was accurate. Their discomfort wasn't based on judgment. It was based on subtle signals their body had been processing all along. And for emotionally sensitive individuals, these signals can become very difficult to ignore. Because the more emotionally aware a person becomes, the more clearly they can feel when something appears authentic, and when something beneath the surface simply doesn't feel right. Something interesting happens as empaths heal. Their tolerance for fake behavior decreases, not because they become cold, not because they become arrogant, but because they stop betraying themselves. For many years, empaths often ignore what they feel. They sense red flags. They notice inconsistencies. They recognize unhealthy patterns. Yet they convince themselves to stay. They give people the benefit of the doubt again and again, not because they are weak, but because they genuinely want to see the good in others. In the past, many empaths ignored red flags. They doubted their instincts. They gave endless second chances. They tolerated emotional inconsistency because they wanted to believe the best in people. They hoped people would change. They hoped their concerns were wrong. And sometimes they sacrificed their own emotional well-being in the process. But healing changes that. Healthy boundaries develop. Self-respect grows. Emotional clarity increases. And suddenly, the empath no longer feels obligated to stay in draining situations. They stop chasing approval. Stop forcing connections. Stop explaining away obvious warning signs. They no longer feel responsible for fixing everyone they meet, or maintaining relationships that constantly leave them exhausted. Instead, they trust what they observe. They trust patterns. They trust consistency. And most importantly, they trust themselves. They understand that actions reveal more than promises, that repeated behavior matters more than good intentions, and that emotional peace is worth protecting. This is why healed empaths often appear different. Some people may even call them distant, more selective, or harder to manipulate. But the reality is much simpler. They're not less caring. They're simply less willing to ignore reality. They still love deeply, still care deeply, still show compassion. The difference is that they no longer sacrifice their own emotional health to maintain relationships built on dishonesty, manipulation, or emotional inconsistency. Healing doesn't make an empath colder. It makes them wiser, and wisdom teaches them that authenticity deserves access to their energy, while fakeness does not. So why do empaths feel uncomfortable around fake people? The answer isn't judgment, it isn't negativity, and it certainly isn't superiority. The answer is awareness. Empaths naturally notice emotional information that others miss. They detect inconsistencies. They recognize hidden tension. They sense when someone's words and emotions don't align, and their minds and nervous systems respond accordingly. Authentic people create peace, because authenticity creates clarity. Fake people create confusion, because performance always requires masks, and masks always create distance. The truth is, an empath's discomfort is often a signal, a quiet message from emotional intelligence, a reminder to pay attention, a reminder to trust patterns, a reminder to value authenticity. Because the healthier an empath becomes, the less willing they are to ignore what they can clearly feel. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all. Not every uncomfortable feeling should be dismissed. Sometimes that feeling is wisdom. Sometimes that feeling is protection. And sometimes that feeling is the difference between being manipulated and seeing the truth.